Summary storytelling. They say honesty can crack open moments we never expect, and what happened to me that afternoon still stirs something deep inside. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me where you are watching from. I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. I was sitting on my friend Karen's porch that late summer afternoon, the kind of warm, golden day that felt almost suspended in time. The neighborhood around her house was quiet, with only the gentle hum of cicadas and the occasional car rolling lazily down the street. I'd known Karen for over 20 years, and her home had always felt like a second living room to me. The wooden boards of her porch were familiar under my sandals, and the hydrangeas she loved so dearly bobbed in the soft breeze. Her son, Michael, now 32 and back in town after years working out west, had stepped outside to join us. I'd known him since he was a little boy running around with grass-stained knees, but the man who walked onto the porch that day was calm, grounded, and surprisingly thoughtful in a way that still caught me off guard. He greeted me with a warm, respectful nod, the kind that says, "I see you, and I'm glad you're here." I remember feeling a quiet gratitude just for being included in these small afternoon gatherings. My own life at the time felt a bit scattered. I was in my mid-50s, my daughter had moved to another state, and the house often felt too still when I returned to it at night. So moments like these, shared with familiar faces in a familiar place, carried more meaning than anyone knew. Karen excused herself to check on something in the kitchen, leaving Michael and me alone on the porch. It wasn't awkward, just unexpected. He leaned against the railing, the sunlight catching the edges of his hair, and looked out over the yard as if gathering his thoughts. After a moment, he turned to me with an expression that seemed more serious than the quiet afternoon called for. He said my name gently, almost carefully, and the tone alone made me straighten up a little. "I've been wanting to tell you something," he said, and his voice held a sincerity that made the air around us feel still, almost heavy in a way that wasn't uncomfortable but undeniably real. I wasn't sure what to expect. Maybe a story from his travels, maybe a question about his mother, maybe something entirely light-hearted. But instead, he spoke about something I hadn't realized anyone had noticed. He mentioned how, years ago, when his father had gone through a difficult period, I had come by the house regularly, helping where I could, offering company to Karen when things felt overwhelming. He said he remembered those quiet gestures, even though he'd been too young at the time to understand everything happening. He continued, explaining that as he'd grown older and faced his own challenges, he often thought back to those days and the steady presence I offered without ever drawing attention to myself. And then he said something I never saw coming, that my kindness had shaped the kind of person he wanted to be. I felt the words settle into me slowly, like soft rain soaking into dry ground. No one had ever said anything like that to me. Not in such a grounded, heartfelt way. There was no grand speech, no rehearsed lines, just an honest expression from someone who had carried the memory quietly for years. And there, on that old porch, with the late afternoon light warming the boards beneath us, I felt a wave of emotion rise before I could stop it. Not sadness and not joy exactly, something deeper, like being truly seen after years of going unnoticed in the background of everyone else's life. I blinked hard, hoping he wouldn't notice the shimmer in my eyes, but of course he did, and his expression softened even further, not out of pity but in understanding. That was the moment everything shifted for me, long before I understood how much it would change the way I saw myself, and him, in the days that followed. For a long moment after Michael spoke, the porch settled into a kind of thoughtful quiet, the kind that isn't empty but full of unspoken understanding, full of old memories stretching their legs, full of the kind of stillness that makes you notice the world around you with a new softness. The cicadas buzzed on, a few leaves drifted from the maple tree at the edge of the yard, and somewhere down the street, A dog barked in the lazy afternoon air. I wiped at the corners of my eyes gently, hoping to keep my voice steady. "I never knew you remembered any of that," I said. "I didn't think it mattered to anyone." Michael shook his head slowly. "It mattered to me more than you know." His voice carried a sincerity that reached right into the space between us. And I felt it, not as flattery, not as something meant to impress me, but as a truth he had clearly carried for years. I couldn't help but study him for a moment, the same way you might look at a familiar painting and suddenly notice details you'd overlooked for years. He had his father's calm eyes, but his mother's gentle steadiness. It struck me then how long it had been since I had really looked at him, not just seen him as the boy who used to leave his shoes in the middle of the hallway. Karen returned before I could respond, carrying a tray of iced tea and 2 mismatched bowls of fresh peaches. She set everything down with a little sigh, the kind she made when she'd been on her feet too long. "You two all right out here?" she asked, glancing between us with mild suspicion only a mother can muster. Michael smiled lightly. "We're good, Mom." She didn't push further, she never did, but something in her expression softened before she went back inside to take a phone call. And just like that, it was the two of us again. Michael picked up a peach slice and leaned back against the porch railing. "I've been thinking a lot since I came home," he said, "about the past, about the kind of life I want now. I guess that's what being in your 30s does to you." I chuckled. "Try your 50s. That's when you start appreciating the good days and questioning the rest." He looked at me with curiosity, like he genuinely wanted to understand something about my life that he hadn't considered before. "Has it been lonely?" he asked gently. The question caught me by surprise, not because it was invasive, but because it came from a place of genuine care. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but something about the moment encouraged honesty. "Sometimes," I admitted, "when my daughter moved away, I kept myself busy. Volunteering, gardening, too many quiet dinners alone. You learn to live with it, but you never quite stop feeling it." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words with the kind of attention people rarely give each other these days. "I didn't know," he said. "You always seemed so strong." I gave a small laugh. Strength and loneliness aren't opposites. They just take turns. He smiled, but it wasn't a cheerful smile. It was thoughtful, respectful, the kind of expression that makes you feel heard. A breeze drifted across the porch, catching the scent of worn wood and the faint sweetness of peaches. It brushed past us, carrying the moment forward. And then Michael spoke again, quieter this time, as though the breeze had encouraged him to let go of another truth he kept tucked away. "You were a steady place for me when I was younger," he said. "I didn't realize it at the time, but coming home now, it makes a lot more sense. You've always had this way of making things feel calmer." His words warmed something in me, something that had been dormant for a long time. Not romantic longing, not anything forbidden or reckless, but a tender recognition that emotional connection can show up in unexpected places. "I never meant to be anything special," I said softly. "You didn't have to mean it," he replied. "You just were." The porch seemed to lean into the moment with us, holding its breath. And that was when I felt a shift, a quiet one, but unmistakable. A shift in the way he saw me, a shift in the way I saw myself, a shift in the space between us that made the afternoon feel different, more alive, as if something important was slowly unfolding. I didn't know yet where it would lead. I only knew that his honesty had opened a door inside me that I hadn't realized was still locked. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of what might be on the other side. The days after that porch conversation unfolded with an unexpected quietness, almost as though life itself was stepping aside to let something new take shape. I found myself thinking about Michael more than I expected. His sincerity, the way he listened without rushing to fill the silence, the earnestness that seemed rare in people much older than him, let alone in someone who had spent years traveling and chasing opportunities I could only imagine. A week later, Karen invited me to help her sort through old boxes in the attic. She had a way of turning simple tasks into social events, and I never minded. Her house held decades of shared memories. When I arrived, she greeted me with a weary smile and a stack of dusty bins that looked like they hadn't been touched since the early 2000s. Michael was already there, lifting a large box as though it weighed nothing. He glanced over his shoulder when he heard me come up the stairs. "There you are," he said, and something in the warmth of his smile sent a small flutter through me, gentle, unexpected, but unmistakable. We started sorting through old school projects, photo albums, and forgotten holiday decorations. Karen wandered in and out, sometimes pausing to reminisce, sometimes disappearing downstairs to answer a phone call or check on dinner. It left Michael and me with plenty of moments to work side by side. At one point, I opened an old photo album and found a picture of him as a teenager, grinning with braces and an oversized football jersey. I laughed softly. "You were such a lanky kid," I teased. He leaned over my shoulder to look at the photo, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence, but not so close that it crossed any line. "And you," he said, "looked exactly the same. Maybe a few fewer laugh lines, but that's about it." I gave him a skeptical look. "Exactly the same, huh?" He nodded, serious. "You've always had this steady sort of grace about you. It hasn't changed." The compliment sat gently between us, landing with a quiet weight. Not heavy, not inappropriate, just honest. The kind of honesty that feels like a hand resting lightly on your heart. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I closed the album and placed it in the keep pile. "Well," I said softly, "thank you." A little later, Karen asked Michael to bring a box downstairs. As he headed toward the attic steps, he paused beside me. "Mind staying a little longer after we finish?" he asked quietly. "There's something I've been wanting to talk to you about." His tone wasn't urgent, but it held intention. Respectful, thoughtful intention. The kind that made my heart beat just a touch faster, not from fear or confusion, but from the sense that another layer of truth was coming. "I can stay," I told him. When the boxes were sorted, and Karen was occupied with a neighbor who had stopped by unexpectedly, Michael and I stepped out onto the side yard, where the shade from a tall birch tree offered a welcome break from the warm afternoon sun. The grass was soft underfoot, and the air carried that familiar late summer scent, sun-warmed leaves, and faint earthiness. He took a slow breath, as though gathering his thoughts carefully. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, "about the people who've influenced me, the ones who helped shape how I see the world. You're one of them." I opened my mouth to respond, but he held up a gentle hand, not to silence me, but to finish his thought. "I don't mean that lightly," he continued. "When I was younger, I didn't understand how much you held together for this family. For my mom, for me. You gave stability when things were hard. And now, being back, well, I see you differently. Not as some figure from my childhood, but as someone I admire deeply." His words carried no trace of romantic undertones, only deep respect, the kind that reaches into a person and shifts something that has been untouched for years. "I don't always feel admirable," I admitted, my voice softer than I intended. "Most days I just feel like I'm putting one foot in front of the other." "That's what makes it meaningful," he said. "You don't try to be anything special. You just are." The sincerity of it hit me harder than I expected, not because it came from him, but because it had been so long since anyone had acknowledged what I quietly gave to the world. A breeze rustled the leaves above us, carrying a faint whisper of coolness through the warm afternoon. The branches swayed lightly, as if encouraging us both to speak honestly. "I'm glad you told me," I said. "It means more than you know." Michael nodded, his expression peaceful. I just wanted you to hear it from me." And in that shaded yard, under the soft sounds of rustling leaves, something settled into place, a mutual recognition, a tender understanding, an emotional connection rooted not in longing but in sincerity. It was the kind of moment that stays with you, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. In the days that followed our conversation under the birch tree, something subtle shifted inside me. Not a dramatic change, but a gentle settling, as if a long-ignored part of my heart had finally been acknowledged. I went about my daily routines, watering the garden, answering emails, tidying up my quiet house, but everything felt a little more vivid, a little more grounded. Even the drive to the grocery store seemed softer, touched by the memory of Michael's thoughtful honesty. I hadn't expected to see him again so soon, but one late afternoon, as I was trimming the fading blooms on my hydrangeas, I heard footsteps approaching along the sidewalk. When I looked up, Michael was standing at the edge of my yard, hands in his pockets, wearing a hesitant smile as if he wasn't sure whether he was interrupting. "Hope I'm not bothering you," he said. "You're not," I replied, brushing soil from my hands. "Just giving these old bushes a little attention." He stepped closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "I was heading over to the park for a walk. Thought maybe you'd like to come along." It had been years since anyone invited me for something as simple and unplanned as a walk. The idea felt refreshing, almost youthful in a way that didn't have anything to do with age. "Let me grab my shoes," I told him. The park was only a few blocks from my house. It wasn't large, but it had tall trees, winding paths, and a small pond that always reflected the sky just right. Evening sunlight filtered through the branches, painting the path in streaks of gold and soft green. For a while we walked without speaking, listening to the chatter of birds settling in for the night. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It felt companionable, like two people sharing the same rhythm without needing to fill it with conversation. Eventually he glanced at me. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I'm glad you asked." He nodded, then looked ahead again, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about our talk the other day," he said. "I meant every word of it. But I also don't want to make you uncomfortable. I know there's history, and age doesn't erase that." The care in his voice struck me deeply. He wasn't dancing around anything, nor pushing at boundaries. He was offering clarity, respect, and space, 3 things I had spent years wishing more people understood. "You haven't made me uncomfortable," I assured him. "If anything, you've made me feel seen, and that's something I didn't realize I'd been missing." He exhaled slowly, relief softening his shoulders. "Good. I wanted to be sure." We reached the pond and paused by the railing. The surface of the water shimmered under the evening light, and a pair of ducks drifted lazily across it. It was peaceful in a way that made my chest feel warm. Michael leaned lightly on the railing. "I know we come from different chapters of life," he said, "but I want you to know something. The respect I have for you, that's not tied to the past or any expectation. It's just genuine." I let the words settle, feeling the weight of their sincerity. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That kind of sincerity is rare." He nodded, then looked at me with a gentleness that held no tension, no unspoken hopes, just honesty. "All I want is for you to feel valued. You've spent so much of your life taking care of other people. You deserve moments that take care of you too." A breeze rippled across the pond, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and warm earth. I felt something inside me loosen, as though the tight thread of years had slowly begun to unwind. "I guess I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that," I murmured. "Well," he said softly, "I'm glad I could offer it." We resumed walking, the path curving gently beneath our feet as the sun dipped lower behind the trees. By the time we reached the edge of the park, the sky had turned a deep, glowing blue. When he walked me back to my house, He didn't linger or say anything overly sentimental. He simply offered a warm, steady smile. "Let's walk again sometime," he said. "Hide like that." And as I watched him head down the sidewalk, the evening settling around us like a soft blanket, I felt a quiet certainty I hadn't felt in years. Not about the future. Life rarely gives us that, but about the moment itself. Sometimes the most unexpected connections don't shake your world. They steady it. They remind you that growth can happen at any age, that emotional truth can arrive from the most unlikely places, and that honest words, spoken with respect, can bring tears not of sadness, but of recognition. And in that recognition, I found something I thought I had lost: a tenderness toward my own life, and a renewed sense of belonging in it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give us like and subscribe this channel.